Good afternoon to one and all, and indeed a very pleasant welcome to all of you, especially our special speaker this afternoon, Mr. Trevor Marshall, historian, educator, and of course my friend. They say that cricket prepares you for life's events, all life's events, and today is no different. In front of a huge crowd, as I used to be at Kensington and around the Caribbean and elsewhere, I am totally prepared for this wonderful audience, and I'm particularly pleased to see so many of you, so diverse, and it seems as though 37 riots are profound in our history, in our minds, and I'm happy to see the interest expressed on this particular occasion. I want also to specially welcome our partners, the open campus of the University of the West Indies, Mr. David Mears, I think he's here, Mr. Ian Austin is here, and of course the associates of the open campus event project. They have been drafted in to ensure that events like this one are not only well organized, but also well presented. The University of the Community Lunchtime Lecture is the brainchild of the late Bradley Niles. And some time ago, we initiated an attempt to enshrine his name in this lecture series. But we thought that the magnanimity with which he brought to his whole purpose in life, that a lunchtime lecture would not have been enough for the late Bradley Niles. In fact, we were thinking of a lecture series called the Bradley Niles Memorial Lecture Series, which we felt would be better represented as an afternoon lecture, an evening lecture, with a greater profile. So we had to hold on that initiative, but I'm sure in collaboration with the Open Campus, we will soon commemorate his name in this particular manner. My task here this afternoon is a very simple one. Apart from welcoming all of you on behalf of the Governor, management and staff of the Central Bank, as well as the Open Campus, is to invite Mr. Ashanti Trotman of Event Project in association with the Open Campus to introduce our special speaker. And I know that you're anxiously awaiting Trevor's remarks. And without any further ado, Mr. Trotman.
Thank you, Mr. Best. A blessed good afternoon to you, specially invited guests, students, members of the academic community, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Mr. Trevor G. Marshall. He is a social historian, he's an author and a teacher. He is currently head of the Department of History at the Barbados Community College and a part-time lecturer in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. He holds degrees in history and in law and received training in education, having gained his diploma in education in 1982. Mr. Marshall is a published author, having written books on folk music, Barbadian culture, heritage, and Caribbean institutions. His scholarly work has also included numerous articles on cricket, religion, and Caribbean culture. Since 1983, Mr. Marshall has been a historical guide, conducting tours in Bridgetown, Speightstown, and Holetown. Mr. Marshall has represented Barbados at the Caribbean Festival of Creative Arts in Trinidad and has delivered lectures on Barbados and Caribbean cultural heritage in Europe, North America, and in Africa. Today, we are honored to have with us to discuss the relevance of 1937. Today, the struggle continues. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Trevor Marshall.
Thank you very much, Ashanti. Mention of that, representing Barbados at Carrie Festa in Trinidad, brings back memories that only Ashanti and I can share. However, he mentioned Dr. Bradley Niles, the late Dr. Bradley Niles, in one breath, and then in another that I'd given lectures in Africa. And it was because of Dr. Bradley Niles that I did go to Africa in 1990. I always remember his calling me up and said, "Trevor, how would you like to go to Africa?" I said, Bradley, stop making a joke. Yeah, man, that's the aim of every red-blooded African Barbadian. He said, well, I have your ticket. And, he had the option of attending a conference in Malaysia and one in Africa at the same time, and he gave me his ticket. So I do fully endorse the idea of a series lecture dedicated to the late, great Bradley Niles. It is because of him that I can stand up and say, I've been to Africa. And whenever I say this next point, it causes disdain from some people. I went to Burkina Faso to attend an arts festival, and when I landed and I got past the tarmac, I kissed the ground. I said, well, imagine, I've been back to the homeland. I don't think a lot of people understand that, what it meant for me. I traveled in air-conditioned conference back to Africa. My ancestors traveled in the hold of a ship, a slave ship, right, to the lash of the whip, etc., to come over here. So it was a very poignant moment. This afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, that is just by the way. I'm supposed to look at I can't remember what the topic is. What is it now, huh? What is it? The relevance of 1937 today, the struggle continues. A luta continua. And ladies and gentlemen, hold fast to your seats because I shall be, as usual, controversial. Right. 1937, ladies and gentlemen, bulks large in the history of Barbados. It did not until about 25 years ago, when, as George Bell has indicated, he and others started writing about it. And Ambassador Robert Morris and myself, among the young Turks at that time, started investigating what had happened in 1936. Prior to that time, 36 was a sepulchral secret. It was like the ancestor who you had to acknowledge but had expired at a hangman's rope. You did not talk about him. You did not talk about 1937 as ordinary Barbadians because it was a dreadful and scandalous time in the history of this country. When you talked about it, those who talked about it were the persons who sat in the castle of their armchairs at home and spoke about it as that disgusting feather Clement Plain wanted to mash up this place. But thank God for Grantley Adams who saved it. Now that posited an antagonism between those persons who supported the notion that Clement Plain was the history of the 37 rebellion and those who argue that Grantley Adams is the real history. I shall not try to establish which side is correct, but I know that, because I know that our grandchildren will still be arguing that. However, Ambassador Morris has come forward 3 weeks ago with a novel, a very tantalizing suggestion that there was a covert relationship between Clement Plain and Grantley Adams. And that Grantley Adams was like Busser, General Busser in 1816, the person in the field, and that Grantley Adams was like Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin, the Generalissimo, the mastermind in the background. Doubtlessly, Ambassador will flesh this out. Up to last night at university, hearing Professor O. Nigel Boland speak, And in the aftermath, some persons were asking, why isn't Ambassador Morris here today? We want to ask him about his novel thesis. That is as much as I will say about that point. The rest of it is about Clement Payne's activity in Barbados. And what is he? I shall not go over the minutiae of Clement Payne's being born in Trinidad, coming here, going to school at Wesley Hall, Bay Street, etc., etc. That I leave to Mr. Commission, right? What I do know is that what I do see in Clement Payne, I see a kind of Martin Luther King, a civil rights leader. And the similarities are not far-fetched. Clement Payne dies at 37, Martin Luther King dies at 39. Each of them organized a program of civil rights, let's say work stoppage, peaceful resistance, right? And also marches and protests. Each of them was thrown in jail. Each of them was taken out of jail and resumed their pilgrimage, their voyage, and their protests. Each of them was vilified by the authorities of the day. And, well, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Clement Payne died of, what was it, a heart attack? Right, but at the very early age of 37. Let me first make the point, talk about Clement Payne's importance in Barbados. Right. Nowadays, we see people gaining Barbadian citizenship after being here how many X, Y, Z years. Clement Payne was not even afforded that luxury by the Barbadian society. There's still many persons who argue, and some of us who are in this room, who figure that he should never have been a national hero because he was born 240 miles to the south of here in Trinidad. And that made him a tricky daddian, and he came here to trick people. And therefore, he should never have been given that high honor, that accolade of being a national hero. But Clement Payne came here on numerous occasions after being born in Trinidad, and it bears a repetition that he did attend Wesley Hall School and then Bay Street Boys School, and that he returned to Trinidad fully at age 23, coming back here when he was, like Jesus, age 33. Age 33. And that's when he began his work. Again, like a historical figure, Jesus, age 33. And he came to a Barbados, which a lot of people don't understand. I think there are very few people in this audience today who can understand the Barbados in which Clement Payne made his entry into his Jerusalem to carry out his work and to undergo his Golgotha, etc. I have a folk memory of Barbados of the 1930s because I was born in a parish, St. John, a planter's parish. And you had extremes of planters. On one hand, there was Madame Norman Simpson, the chatelaine of Verdun. She lived in a grand manor at that house there beyond small town. And she allowed us to pick the cherries, and she did not set the dogs on us. But then when you went down to Bowmanston, the man at Bowmanston would let out his dogs every Friday afternoon until Monday, and you could not pass that road between Bowmanston and Cherry Grove. And if you went down to Todd's, and my father lived in Macaroni Village, and I had to pass from Bowmanston to Todd's. The Chandlers at Todd's had brindles, had Alsatians, and German Shepherds. And they let them down their long driveway. And I learned to run by running to escape those dogs. I can tell anybody that. I represented Lodge in the 1,500 meters and the 800 meters. I represented my university in the 3,000 meters and the cross country. I ran the marathon. My training was running from those dogs. And if you think I'm being comic, I'm sorry, it is unintentional, because the option was to walk around Bowmanston and around Poole and around Crossroads and then to go down to Todd's. But there was no escaping those dogs. Now that was the problem that people in this territory had with rapacious and vindictive and vicious estate owners. And there were some of them. There were some like the Simpsons who were not. And you praise and you bless the Simpsons and Mrs. Norman, her son Kiffin, and all those others. They were genteel people, and not without reason. They came from a plantation called Guinea. Guinea, which reminds us of Africa. In fact, I asked that as a question. Name a plantation in Barbados which has an African name, and nobody can find out. Guinea. But the Simpsons were at Guinea, and they were legendary in terms of their eleemosynary actions towards Barbadian black people in St. John and St. Philip. They possessed that sense of noblesse obligée. But there were some Simon Legrees in Barbados who were vicious, who were racial bullies, who raped people. And we can see, I actually saw, well, not the actual act, but a man dragging a little black girl into the canes, and she's squealing out, "No, Mr." and I shall not say his name, right? That is what happened in Barbados in the 1930s. And there was nothing that could stop you from that from happening. I also saw and knew that my grandfather, who worked as an engine worker at Colleton Plantation, died in 1937, leaving his wife and 4 daughters. And the plantation man at Colleton came and told my grandmother, "You and those daughters have to come to work in order for you to keep that land that your husband had." And my grandmother put her hands akimbo and said, "Not for whatever." And she used a donkey cart and put a tray on her hide and went into the ground and planted potatoes, yams, breadfruit, etc., put them in the donkey cart and went around and said, "My 4 daughters will not be subservient to a plantation," right? But she was one of a few. So it is that kind of situation. That's in the 1930s. My grandfather died in 1937. None of my aunts went to work at Colleton Plantation. My mother actually was a pupil teacher, right? And that's probably why Trevor Marshall is here. But the option was that to go and pick pond grass at age 10, or to go in the Perry gang. In fact, your mother said if you did not work at school and you did not behave yourself, she would send you to the Perry gang, which was picking pond grass, the 3rd gang. Or she would send you to Dodds. And Dodds was the reformatory. So I have actual personal images of what the 30s were like. I was born in 1948, so it's folk memory. And in my family, there are historians and people who told you of those kinds of happenings. They told us of people who were shot and killed. Not only the little boy who was killed by Swain, but other people were shot and killed. And the comment of the police officer on one such occasion was, "Another black bottle broken," or "another black bottle break." That is the kind of situation into which Clement Payne came. And therefore, you have to understand that people have adduced a number of arguments as to why there were labor rebellions in Barbados at the time. Very few of them have instanced the matter of racial terrorism, racial bullying. And that is what occurred in Barbados on some plantations. I would not say all. Now that has been captured in David Brown's book, published only 2 months ago, Race, Class, Politics, and the Struggle for Empowerment in Barbados, 1914 to 1937. And his final chapter gives us an extremely vivid image of what life was like in Barbados at the time. I shall not really go into it, but just to remind you what David says. The first evidence of disturbances in Barbados occurred on the night of July 26, when a crowd expecting to see Clement Payne before his deportation went on the rampage. They vented their anger by smashing street lights in Nelson Street, Bay Street, Beckwith Street, Probin Street, and Jordan's Lane in the city. Cars outside the Empire were smashed, and a bus belonging to the General Motors Company was damaged. This early activity appeared to be spontaneous and disorganized, except for a clash with the police at Golden Square, which resulted in a form of sort of pitched battle between the two forces. The rebels, fighting with sticks and stones, kept up a constant bombardment. We are not told of this sometimes. After a few minutes of missile throwing, the greatly outnumbered police were forced to make a hasty retreat amidst a hail of missiles. One of the few instances of pitched battles between black rebels, and we must remind you, our evidence indicates that there were absolutely no white persons who engaged in rebellious activity at that time in Barbados. And you had poor whites who suffered almost the same kind of vicious, really, activity and repression from the elite whites. And I know about that because, again, St. John is a poor white parish. David Brown goes on to say, the next day, July 37 and 27, violence flared up again when a huge gang of rebels gathered on the wharf. They collected sticks and stones and, turning in the direction of Broad Street, smashed almost every store window, including Whitfield's, the City Pharmacy, the Ideal Store, Cave and Shepherd, Hope Ross Limited, Antage Electrical, Collins Limited, Johnson Stationery, Hutchinson and Company, and C.F. Harrison. Bridgetown was in chaos, especially Broad Street, the hub of the merchant planter class business activity. There appeared to be some purposive acts of destruction in these activities on Broad Street. For in 3 days of smashing and looting, Fogarty's store remained untouched. William H. Fogarty. An eyewitness account testified that on July 27th, when a rebel attempted to smash the show window, a crowd was overheard to exclaim, "Leave Fogarty, he does give me a break," etc., and they went ahead. Now that is the prelude, that is the immediate aftermath of Clement Osborne Payne being arrested on a charge of making a false statement about his nativity, his place of birth. He said Barbados, and I suspect that he knew he wasn't born in Barbados. I think he knew he was born in Trinidad because but he wanted to try a thing. Right? He wanted to get away from the only charge that they could have against him, because he had said, and across the years, the Alexandra teachers listened to him. Educate, agitate, but do not violate. I don't know what he would have said to them today, but I'll come on to that in a few minutes, I do promise you. Right? So Payne had been, he was an expert political animal. Right? Sometimes I think of Robert Morris, as the epitome of Clement Payne, making statements very carefully weighed, right? And always coming down on the side of justice, but temperance. Temperance. I didn't say don't rock the boat, but don't go overboard. And I think that was Payne, right? He knew the Barbados in which he operated. Right? And whether or not he was an agent of Grantley Adams, he knew he had to steer a tightrope case. Because Captain E.B. Grant, who I knew, Grant was just waiting. Every time Payne went to speak, Captain Grant, I don't know if anyone here remembers Grant, with some bulldog eyes, huge, hulking, 6'4", 260 pounds, sheer menace. You see pictures of him as a young person, and the persona is there. The physiognomy tells the man. He was waiting every night, waiting for Clement Payne. He said, little man, the B-I-T, well, some word. He won't cross the line. He won't cross the line. I'd be waiting there. But that thing's free. He lived up Station Hill, and I saw and spoke to him before his death. And he went to his grave unrepentant in his belief that Clement Payne was a vagabond and should not have been spoken of in any terms except condemnatory ones. But I want to argue against that. I want to argue, and this is one of my first controversial point. Clement Payne is far more important in Barbados than any other person in the 20th century. Because Clement Payne came here, yes, March 26, left July 26, 4 months. But we historians sometimes ask you, imagine, as John Lennon says, imagine, but imagine, not imagine there are no possessions, as Lennon would say, imagine Barbados without Clement Payne. Imagine, right, no July the 26th or 27th. Barbados continues tranquil, right, on the outside. Those scenarios I painted of you happening in St. John, according to my folk evidence and according to my own activity, my own experiences, because there were serious continuities, right, those continued. Where would Grantley Adams be today? Grantley Adams entered Parliament in 1934. Would there have been a progressive league in 1938? No, because Clement Payne paved the way for the Norman Commission, not Norman, the Moyne Commission, to say that there must be changes in Barbados. Clement Payne paved the way for people like his namesake, Philip Payne from Harrow, Hope Stevens, Martineau, etc. Persons who were not in the riots, to piggyback on the riots and say, now is our time to establish a middle-class political party. And they did not even want it to call it Barbados Labour Party. They called it Barbados Progressive League. Without Clement Payne, there would not have been a Barbados Progressive League. Without Clement Payne, there might not have been a Moyne Commission, because it is when Barbados went up in almost in flames that the Moyne Commission said, well, look, Jamaica, sure, riots, rebellions in Jamaica are a dime a dozen. Tell me what month there is in Jamaica that there's not a popular outbreak. Sure, don't bother about them. Trinidad, right? Perhaps it's those people down there, those indentured immigrants, the Indians, the descendants of them. Perhaps it's those who are making noise in Trinidad. But then they hear Barbados, and W.P. Beckles had some lurid phrases. City in ruins, Bridgetown in the hands of rioters. He painted a picture next to Armageddon, right? And the British, therefore, decided, no, we must come down, and like Frondell Stewart, they decided we must have a commission of inquiry. Right? Right? We must have a commission of inquiry, right? Even if it only tells us what we already know. Well, commissions of inquiry are useful to us because you may know the information, but when the commission is finished and submitted, it is between two covers, and you can act on it. And that is what the Moyne commissioners did. Okay? And let's continue. Hugh Springer, the right excellent Hugh Springer. Where would he have been without Clement Payne? Like Grantley Adams, I submit, he would have been a substantial lawyer. He would have had his cases, his respectability, his probity, his decency unsullied. No flies would be on him. He would have lived to a good old age without seeing himself being part of a Barbados Workers' Union, because a Barbados Workers' Union would not have come about in 1941. No trade union legislation might have come about in 1939 if Clement Payne had not been here. What about Frank Walcott? He was a clerk at Lashley's on Swan Street. He would have remained there. The most he might have been is store detective at Cave Shepherd later in life, when they started to blacken those store detectives. That is all he could have looked forward to. And I'm very serious, right? You say, okay, there goes Trevor Marshall again, controversial as usual, but whatever I say usually is accepted 20 years later. So I feel good, right? I feel good. So what would Frank Walker have become? General Secretary, Barbados Workers Union, where there would have been no such entity? Think of it. Charles Duncan O'Neill died in 1936. Would he have been put up for national hero status? I grant you no. His name was already mud. His profile was that of an agitator, a person who betrayed his class, a madman, of a doctor who, instead of making money in Bridgetown, gave his money to all and sundry and aroused rabble-rousers like Israel Lovell and Darnley Alleyne. By the way, the uncle of Ezra Alleyne, if that means anything, Ulrich Grant, etc., etc. Those unrespectable activities are what consumed the life of Dr. O'Neill and brought him to an early grave. So he would never have been a national hero. So who have we gone through? Grant E. Adams, Hugh Springer, Frank Walker, Charles Duncan O'Neill. What about Errol Barrow? He saw the riots from the vantage point, I think, of this Cozier's house over on Crumpton Street. Not saw, but heard about. He was then a Harrison College boy. He left the island in 1940 to go after the war. Assuming that there was change and not continuity in Barbados and not change after 1937, would Errol Barrow have been motivated to return to this island in 1949-50? He had an opportunity to make a cushy living in the land which had adopted him and in which he was already an aircraft and air services hero, England. I put it to you that Errol Barrow might not have come back to Barbados in 1950 because the changes of the 1939, 41, 43, when there was a reduction in the necessities for voting, the voting situation, voting was brought down. Right? Artisans and women could vote for the first time. That might never have occurred. In other words, all of the liberalization which followed the Moyne Commission might have bypassed Barbados. As it bypassed Bahamas. The Bahamas only reached in the 1970s where Barbados was back in 1940s when the Bay Street Boys, the planters, were defeated in government, defeated at the voting booth by Lyndon Pinlin and his Bahamas party. Right? So the Bahamas had to wait another 40 years. And remember, the Bahamas had a riot in the 1940s, 42, similar to those in the plantation territories in the 1930s. So like Bahamas, Barbados might have had to wait until the 1970s for holidays with pay, old age pension, reduction of the voting age, all of those particular kinds of dispensations which we now associate with the coming of liberalization in this island. Like Bermuda. And Bermuda, some people say, is still in the grip of racism. We might have had to wait until the 90s to have our civil rights being respected and being accepted in this island. So we've gone through a number of national heroes. There were some, Bussa and Sarah Ann Gill. And then you had Garfield Sobers. Perhaps he might never have been a national hero, for all you know, because whites might still be controlling cricket, and he might never have had a look in at cricket in the early 1950s. You never know. So we come to the last of them himself, Clement Payne. And you realize that far from being a scandalous person, that he is the liberator. He is the person to whom we should pay obeisance. In fact, there's only a bust of him in Golden Square. There's a bust of Louis Albert Lynch at the site of the Old Modern High School. Both men, I submit, should have been national heroes. Louis Lynch, who died at 53, having established a status for Barbadians in Canada, in England, having erected the modern high school as a pinnacle and an edifice and a memorial to his industry, right? Starting from a school in 1944 in Swan Street, taking it to Melbourne there, and having, at its greatest extent, 2,500 students, to some of whom he gave scholarships, some of whom he sent overseas on athletic scholarships. Louis Lynch has only a bust. Clement Payne has only a bust. I do not begrudge the Right Excellent Errol Barrow his statue, nor do I begrudge the Right Excellent Frank Walcott his statue. But of course, you know, there's still an excrescence in Bridgetown, right? Some 400 meters from here. And I don't know if this is going on, if you're going to, or if you have a 10-second delay. But we have a statue to a man who was the most vicious anti-abolitionist of his time. And a statue which is testimony to the whites of that day telling a musty, stinking, frowsy lie that he saved Barbados from the French. And wherever I go, and I have an audience like this, I shall say that the story of Nelson saving Barbados is a musty, stinking, frowsy lie. There is a Trevor Marshall, you know, because whatever I say can be backed up by facts. Clement Payne's statue should be there where Nelson's stands. Because he liberated Broad Street and Bridgetown from the grip of the capitalists and the merchants. Tell them I say so. The Nation will not publish this. The Nation is not here, and CBC will not. So you are guarantors of my secret. All right? So we go on, ladies and gentlemen. What is there of substance in Clement Payne's presence in Barbados? Yes, we see, and a lot of these were attributed to Grantley Adams. The Moyne Commission made recommendations, and in Barbados, the following were introduced. In terms of housing, the eradications of slums and ghettos. Rural housing was dispatched to the masses and financially aided by the government, and the land was taken from the plantocracy. The last instance being, in 1980, the Freehold Tenantry Purchase Act, under which the descendants of my great-grandfather and my grandmother, Tootie Marshall, who refused to work at Colleton Plantation, can now have that land in St. John at 2 cents, 10 cents per square foot, right? And so all praise to Mr. G.M. Adams, right? In economic terms, there was diversification of the agricultural sector through mixed farming. The sugar monopoly was reduced. The English quota for sugar was introduced. Industrial development was approached in the 1950s. There was the harbor, the development of peasant agriculture, programs of land settlement were introduced. And then in communications, ships were sent to facilitate movement between these islands. 1938, British Overseas Airways introduced a West Indian facility, BWIA, now Caribbean Airways. Wireless facility was extended in these islands. In terms of labor and the trade unions, laws were passed bringing into being our blanket trade union, the Barbados Workers Union. Peaceful picketing was allowed. A labor department was established in Barbados. The late, what's his name, Guy Perrin was the first labor commissioner. Workmen's compensation was enforced by act of law. Unemployment benefits were introduced. In political terms, universal adult suffrage came in 1950-51. The act passed in 1950. First voting, my mother voted it for the first time in 1951. The Bush experiment, training persons for the responsibility of cabinet office. Then the Federation of the West Indies, which some argue was really a sideshow and should not have come at that time. That, like, let's say, the 1980s, we should now have been looking at the possibility of federation because we were pursuing two goals at the time. national or insular independence and at the same time federal. And we did not have a transcendental notion of ourselves as West Indians. We still hated the Shannick Jamaicans. The men, sorry, the men, right. We did not see them belonging to the same race as we were. We were civilized Negro people. They were horrendous black people, not too much removed from Africa. And as for the Trinidadians, enough said. In education, more schools were established. 1950s, Coleridge and Parry were joined, St. Leonard's established, Princess Margaret established, Teacher Training College, Eardiston, 1948, encouraging of adult education, the Royal Institute, etc. In the 1950s, free school meals, biscuit and milk came to us. And then in the 1960s, hot meals, clothes for the children who were poor. Girls were now allowed to compete for scholarships. Additional equipment put in schools. Vocational education established for girls. In public health, and this is one of the areas that a lot of people don't concentrate on in looking at the riots, that Barbados was a disaster area in health terms, just waiting to be ignited. And after the Clement Payne riots and rebellions, medical advisors were established, medical facilities were centralized, hygiene taught in the schools, preventive medicine taught, nurses trained and sent overseas, Dame Nita Barrow and others sent overseas. So those came out of the riots. And not all of them have been attributed to Clement Payne. As a matter of fact, it's not until 1962 that one gentleman called Frank Ezra Clifford, or Tony Hines, who happens to be my father-in-law, wrote in the Advocate a small memo saying this is the 25th year of the riots. Up to that time, nobody spoke about Clement Payne. As I said, he was an ancestor who you did not acknowledge. You could not forget him. But you tried to suppress his memory. So we fast forward to the present day. So we see the results of the 1930s. We associate them with Grant E. Adams and the Labour Party. Some people associate them with Errol Barrow and the Democratic Labour Party. But we tend not to see them as the result of Clement Payne's activity. However, if we fast forward now to 2012, were Clement Payne to come back, he would be, 98 years old, having been born in 1904? No, probably 108. Yes, 108 years old. And, well, Jeremy Sisnett is 111, so if Clement Payne were back, let's assume he was back, and we could ask him some questions. Mr. Payne, sorry to disturb your rest, but asking you, what do you think of Barbados today? Because we had given a lecture, the struggle continues, right? A luta continua. So we had asked you, where did you get that title from? And he said, Amilcar Cabral in the African Revolution. And he would say, oh, the Africans revolted. We were telling him, yes, the Africans overthrew their colonial masters, Britain, Portugal, Belgium, France, Germany even, all of them. And they now have completed control of the continent. In your day, there was only Liberia and Ethiopia. Right? He would say that he was happy about that. But if he brought him back home to Barbados, what would he argue? Mr. Payne, what do you think about present-day Barbadian society? And we would tell him that before you say anything, sir, Barbados, as Barbados celebrates 45 or 46 years of independence, we can truly say that a young nation has a lot for which to be thankful. Our country has been basically untouched by the ravages of national disasters. We had one slight little thing called Thomas, and we had a bigger slash in Janet. But natural disasters or those caused by human beings have not ravaged Barbados. Our land is still beautiful with its rolling hills and valleys. These hills and fields beyond recall, as a matter of fact, are part of our national anthem. We have streams, although streams have been canalized, and the sea is being polluted. But it is still unspoiled by wars or epidemics. It's won several awards as the freest black country in the world. Our tourist industry, now the mainstay of the economy, is thriving, or is it? And together with manufacturing, provides opportunities for thousands of school leavers. Today we look forward to the future with confidence and hope, Mr. Payne. Our institutions have been tested and found strong during the past 46 years of independence. As a matter of fact, we've never had to reduce our dollar. The youth of our country are showing in many ways that they're well equipped to take over the baton of responsibility. Although, stick a pin on that one, sir. Right. So we would argue, Mr. Payne, that in essence, Barbados is near to a developed country. So what is it that you can suggest to us that can help our countries? Because strikes, demonstrations, and marching against measures from employers and businesses are passé. We now have a social contract. The labor scene is now in Barbados, it is one of peaceful coexistence. And our Barbadians continue to be industrious workers, intelligent and easy to train. The educational system turns out bright, eager young persons each year to fill the offices, factories, and other places of business. We actually have a university. We have a junior college, Barbados Community College. We have a polytechnic, as the British would say, a trade school, Samuel Jackman Prescott. What is there that's lacking in Barbados? And Clement Payne would say, well, look, I've been reading your newspapers, and up to this morning, I saw this in our newspaper, right? And here's it. Having found no one suitable, or is our intention to apply to the chief immigration officer? I wish Clement Payne said, you mean the same immigration people giving us trouble again? To the chief immigration officer for permission to advertise for a non-national to fill the post of primary school teacher at a school in St. John. And Clement Payne would say, wait, why is this? Why is this? And I would say, Mr. Payne, right, excellent Mr. Payne, I've counted them, and this is the 10th one for 2012. In 2011, there were 36 such notices in the newspaper, Mr. Payne, and that is 36 people who don't look like you and me. There were 36, there were 30 of them, sir, who were Caucasians. I understand there were 3 were Chinese and 2 Indians and 1 of racial indeterminacy, right? But not black. And Mr. Payne, they have come into Barbados, each of them was male, and each of them came with a wife, that is 72, and each of them came with at least 2 children. That's 144 people entering our society at the top, sir. And we are seeing, still we are seeing, as in your day, that Barbadians are asking, where can we find jobs? Mr. Payne, what do you think of this excrescence? And Payne would say, well, it seems as though the struggle continues. And through the same immigration office, the immigration office stopped me from coming to Barbados, even though I had been born here. The immigration office is now bringing in people under a scam. And I, Trevor G. Marshall, call it a scam. Because how can you, in a society which has a university which trains children to PhD level, this is not a place like Iran, which is building rocket scientists. So you cannot say, having found no one suitable. Mr. Payne, I'm saying that this society has not only a university, it has a community college, it has Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic, it has a teacher training college, and you can find someone writing in the newspaper, and the person is already here. Having found no one suitable, it is our intention to apply to the chief immigration officer. Mr. Payne, what do you say about that? He would say it is scandalous. Barbados still needs to be decolonized. And remember, Menzies Chase went to jail for saying that tonight is a funny day, but today is a funny night. So Mr. Payne would say, the struggle still continues. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Payne, I would submit to you, If you have 36 people coming in at the level of middle management and upper management, think of what that means for us and our children. Mr. Payne, I submit to you, here is a newspaper, which is Friday, the February 17th, 2012. What is it? Weekend edition. And it shows here a gentleman called Paul Yelling. Paul Yelling, who is a chef at one of our hotels. Paul Yelling is a sous chef, not just any chef. He is a rum chef. And he says he started cooking, etc., etc. And he says, and I quote, "There's a lot of local talent, but it is unfortunate that our hotels would rather, what? Trust in foreign chefs than promote local ones. Barbados has some world-class restaurants, etc. But our people in the hotels bring in foreign chefs." Mr. Payne and I will submit that that is nonsensical, and that is the least that we can say. Because Mr. Payne and I know that in Barbados, when you bring in 36 people at middle and upper management, and there's one such advertisement, one such advisement in the paper today, when you bring in such persons, they depress the people like Paul Yelling who are trained, who further depress persons below them who would aspire to Paul Yelling's position, who further depress people who are at supervisory level. So those persons like Paul Yelling have to take a junior management position. The person who should be middle management has to take a supervisory position. The person who should be supervisor has to come in our situations at entry level. The entry level person has to go on the block. Has to go on the block, ladies and gentlemen. If 36 people come here every year, and we're moving fast, in 4 months we have 10 such persons coming and occupying our position. Clement Payne and I would say we are making conditions for another 1937. Because when you are arguing, ladies and gentlemen, that the people on the block sleep on during the day, plan crime, and attack your houses at night, think of it. There's no upward mobility for them, at least in certain areas. Think of the area of property management. My brother-in-law tells me that the Association of Property Managers in Barbados is 90% white and 70% foreign. And what does property management involve? Looking after buildings, etc. Making commitments, paying bills, seeing after blah, blah, blah. No other country in Barbados, in the Caribbean, has that notice I just read. Having found no one suitable is our intention to apply to the Chief Immigration Officer. And ladies and gentlemen, last year, I said that I would picket the Chief Immigration Office. I was advised by some policeman friends of mine that if I wanted to taste Dodds, that I would do that. Right? So we go back to Clement Payne's situation. Right? And this is the Barbados that we think is so advanced. I could never see that notice in Trinidad newspapers. Trinidad has a policy of Trinidadians first. Then people from Monos, Huevos, Shaka Shikari, Carrera, islands off Trinidad, after which people from Tobago and then Soldado Rock. Nobody else can go to Trinidad and have a job for which Trinidadians are trained. Not even Antigua, which is committed to tourism. No other Caribbean island has that situation in which we are bringing in a new rapacious parasitic class. Just as it was in the 1930s, the Trinidadians complained of South Africans in 1937 occupying positions of managerial authority in their society, and they instanced that as one of the reasons for their rioting. And we, Barbadians, are passive, are acquiescent, are complacent, and docile, or are we? And I call on the women in the audience, and I call on the women of Barbados, because apparently the men are supine. I call on the women to take this situation into their hands. Women are being displaced in hotels, etc., because you have executive chefs coming from overseas. And Clement Payne does not like that, ladies and gentlemen. He speaks to me and he says he does not like that. And I'm not a Nobel man, but he speaks to me nonetheless. I'm a historian, so he speaks to me, right? So the name of this lecture was The Struggle Continues. And without agitating you further, ladies and gentlemen, I'm done.
Once again, I want to thank this diverse audience for their full and total participation. It is my pleasure now to ask Mr. David Mears of the Open Campus to give us a short wrapping up of today's session. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly warmed by your attendance and your questions from Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall and I actually sat on the telephone for about 55 minutes, it was, close to an hour, trying to batten down this particular theme for today. We wanted to especially capture the relevance of the 37 riots and the actors in that process, but also to give a juxtaposition to life in Barbados today. And I think he did that expertly. So first off, I'd like to give him sincere thanks for that. I think in this particular context, Barbados really needs these discussions to carry forward its people. A history of a country is only as great as the persons who read about it after it has gone. And so we really need to continue in this vein. So thank you for coming out. It was a pleasure. We'll have another one of these events continuing this long-standing lunchtime lecture series on May 31st. We have your contact information so you'll know about it. Take care and God bless.